What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another Hunter's Guide to Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. In this video, we're going to be bringing you an endgame build, this time for the Switch Axe. Now this endgame build is all about survival and health regeneration. But what is an endgame build? Well, it's a mix set that is crafted from various monster armor pieces to give you a unique and strong build to take on endgame activities. They could be generalized builds, or as in the case of this build, specialized in certain aspects. Now as always, if you find these builds helpful or informative or even entertaining, please consider subscribing to the channel as well as leaving a like on the video, as it really does help, and I try to bring you a variety of builds for a different variety of ways to play. Now when it comes to the Switch Axe, it's in a very good place in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. It's a very strong weapon in all honesty, and it's a lot of fun to use. With its powerful axe and sword attacks, it's able to deal out a lot of damage, and whilst it does have mobility issues in the form of its slow movement, especially whilst in sword mode, this can be countered with skills as well as your wire bug maneuvers. And so with that, I present to you the Health Regeneration Switch Axe build. This build is a survival focused build that gives hunters the unique ability to regenerate their health without having to stop, sheath their weapon and drink a potion. It's also not lacking in DPS, so it should be able to take on monsters quite quickly. So for this health regeneration build, you'll need the Azushi True Mask, the Malzeno Mel, Golden Loon Braces, Malzeno Coil, and Golden Loon Greaves. For your Petalace, this is down to personal preference. I always tend to use the Absolute Petalace, to be honest, unless I'm going for speed runs, in which case I would use the Demon Petalace. And then for your Talisman, you want to go for a Talisman that can get at least Rapid Morph to level 2 and a point in Part Breaker, whether this is via the skills actually on the Talisman or the decoration slots. As for my weapon, I'm using the Vengeful Fell Cleave, which is the Scorned Magnum Marlow Switch Axe. This has the Switcher Rampage decoration attached to it to give us the File Switch Boost skill. This not only increases the damage of power file switch axes when you perform switching attacks, but it also helps when it comes to the sword and switch gauge management of the switch axe we're using, making it one of the most useful Rampage decoration slots for the switch axe so long as you're using power file switch axes. Now when it comes to the decorations, you've got a fair few to play around with, so I've gone for Tenderizer Jaws to max out Weakness Exploit, Critical Jaws to max out Crit Boost, I've then gone for Steadfast Jaws to max out Stun Resistance. This kind of is optional though, in all honesty. You can replace this for decorations like Grinder Jaws if you want speed sharpening. I've then gone for Cornerstone Jaws to max out the Defiance skill, Wirebug Jaws to max out Wirebug Whisperer, Quick Switch Jaws to max out Rapid Morph, Sharp Jaws to max out Protective Polish, Spirit Bird Core Jaw to give us the Spirit Bird Core skill, a Brace Jaw which is optional for a point in flinch free, an Attack Jaw to put a point in attack boost, and then finally a Jumping Jaw to give us a few points in Evade Extender, but this again is an optional jaw in all honesty. You can replace it if you wish. So there are some optional jaws there if you want to switch them around. So if you've done what I've done here, you have a build with a raw attack of 414 with a blast rating of 27. You'll also have purple sharpness, and you'll have 0% base affinity, but this is 50% when we take into account Weakness Exploit. You'll also have a strong defense of 718 that is strong against fire and ice, but unfortunately slightly weak to the other elements, but this shouldn't matter too much. When it comes to the switch skills, in all honesty, they're down to personal preference. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you'll have Defiance at level 5, a wonderful defensive skill that when a monster becomes enraged, the Defiance buff becomes active. When this is the case, it will increase our defenses. It nullifies weak, strong and powerful roars, as well as nullifies wind effects and tremors against our hunter. It also gives us a plus 30 defense. Very useful when it comes to our survivability, especially with the switch axe when we're latching onto a monster with the finishing discharge switch skill. Anyway, you'll then have attack boost at level 4, increasing the raw attack of this build, and at level 4 or above it provides us a percentage bonus to our raw attack. You'll then have peak performance at level 3, increasing our raw attack whenever we have full health. This is one of our main DPS skills that work in unison with the health regen aspect of this build, as you can often lose peak performance, but when we're able to regenerate our health, we can get that peak performance back quite quickly. You'll then have critical boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our raw attacks whenever they crit a monster. You'll then have weakness exploit at level 3, increasing our affinity by up to 50% when we're at weakness exploit level 3 whenever we're attacking monster weak points. You'll then have protective polish at level 3, which is a wonderful sharpness management skill that whenever we sharpen our weapon, we put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time. You'll then have stun resistance at level 3, negating all stun effects on our hunter. This is an optional skill. This may be replaced if you're more confident with not being hit with skills such as speed sharpening, which would allow us to sharpen our weapon super quickly and apply that protective polish to our weapon even quicker. You'll then have Heartbreaker at level 3, which is another key skill for this build to work effectively, as it allows us to break monster body parts more easily, but we'll talk about why it's essential in a minute. You'll then have Wirebug Whisperer at level 3. Wirebug Whisperer is a skill that reduces the cooldown on our wirebugs, as well as how long we can hold additional wirebugs. But unfortunately you need to get this skill to level 3 in order for it to be this useful. You'll then have Rapid Morph at level 3, which increases the damage of our morph attacks, as well as how quickly we can morph between sword and axe mode. And then you'll have Bloodright, which is the main health regeneration skill for this build. Bloodright is a skill found on the Malzeno armor. Whenever we deal damage to a broken monster body part, a portion of that damage will be used to heal our hunter. This is the reason we've gone for maxed out Heartbreaker, but Bloodright is definitely a useful skill at helping us regenerate our health without having to stop, sheath our weapon and drink a potion. Anyway, you'll then have Razor Sharp at level 2, which is kind of a byproduct of this build in all honesty, but it does kind of help and add towards our sharpness management, as it prevents your weapon from losing sharpness 25% of the time. Some people would say Razor Sharp combined with Protective Polish is a little bit overkill, but with my thinking, Razor Sharp meant that I could put points into stun resistance instead of taking speed sharpening. Anyway, you'll then have Spare Shot at level 2, it's a byproduct again of the armor we're using, it's not needed on a Switch Axe build as it's a gunner skill. You'll then have Recovery Up at level 2, which increases the amount of health restored when restoring health, and this apparently does work in unison with Bloodright, allowing us to get more health back. It would have been nice to max this out in all honesty, and you could if you wanted to, as there are decoration slots to play around with. You'll then have Evade Extender at level 2, which is a defensive skill for the Switch Axe. I use this when I'm not able to use the Elemental Burst counter, as it helps us dodge out of the way and counter the slow mobility that the Switch Axe has. You'll then have Master Mounter at level 1, which is a byproduct of the Qurios Crafting we have on this build, which improves your Wyvern riding skills. You'll then have Flinch Free at level 1, prevented minor knockbacks from monsters as well as our allies. You'll then have Spirit Bird Call at level 1, which is a useful quality of life skill that I tend to always bring, which, when we have this on our build, will receive the effects of a random Spirit Bird at fixed intervals during certain quests. This is non-arena quests basically, so it means that we don't always have to go out of our way to find Spirit Birds, as they will come to us eventually. And then finally you'll have Chain Crit at level 1. It would have been nice to have this higher, but at level 1 it's still very useful, as when attacking a monster, continuously landing hits will gradually increase our attack and elemental attack. So there we have it, that is the main skills. But before we move on to pros and cons, let's quickly talk about the Qurios Crafting. Now the Qurios Crafting is a thing on these endgame builds, but it's not to the point where it's providing us exceedingly rare skills. The Qurios Crafting skills and slot upgrades don't require a ton of investment or a ton of luck to get. So with the Zushi True Mask, I've got an additional tier 1 decoration slot. With the Malzeno Mel, I've got another additional tier 1 decoration slot, as well as the Master Mounter skill, but that's not really needed in all honesty. With the Golden Loom Braces, I got a tier 3 decoration slot upgrade, but to be honest, I'm using a tier 2 decoration slot in its place, so it's kind of a wasted Qurios Crafting upgrade. With the Malzeno Coil, I've got a tier 2 decoration slot upgrade, as well as an additional tier 1 decoration slot, as well as the Master Mounter skill again. And then with the Golden Loom Greaves, I was lucky enough to get to 1 point in Weakness Exploit. This is probably the rarest of the Qurios Crafting featured on this build, but to be honest, if you're able to get a tier 2 slot decoration upgrade on this armor piece, or any of the other armor pieces, you can fit a Tenderizer decoration into it and get that Weakness Exploit skill that way. But there you have it, that is the health regeneration Switch Axe build. But every build out there has pros and cons. No build is absolutely perfect. Even these endgame builds, with all their high-end equipment and skills, have positives and negatives. With this health regeneration build, its biggest pro is the health regeneration. Once a monster body part is broken, which is normally the weaker body parts of a monster, we can then focus on it and stay in a fight for longer, as we'll be healing ourselves, should we take damage of course, for our attacks, and we won't have to stop, sheath our weapon and drink a potion. It should be noted as well, when fighting afflicted monsters and we have the Blood Blight effect on our hunter, which allows us to restore our health when we're attacking a monster, the health regeneration of this build really reaches insane levels. On top of that, the next pro is the build's survivability, with skills like Defiance, Stun Resistance, Evade Extender and more. This build gives you a lot of survivability options for taking on endgame hunts. And then finally is that this build is still good when it comes to damage output. It's able to bring down monsters in a fairly decent time. Whilst it may not reach speedrunner times, it's still able to bring them down relatively quickly, and it can also be used against pretty much any monster. Rarely is a monster completely immune to the blast element, which means that we can take this build against anything we come across. As for the cons though, there are a few. One of the biggest cons for this build is, unfortunately, you will need a decent talisman for this build to work. Otherwise, you'll have to play around with the decorations and drop some skills here and there. And the other con, which is really just a nitpick in all honesty, which is that if you never get hit, then the health regen aspect of this build is wasted. But this build is for players who like to have that health regeneration, but also still have enough bite in their build to deal damage. And for me, to be honest, this is one of the most fun switch axe builds to use. I often find myself using the finishing discharge, lashing myself onto monsters, and accidentally taking more damage than I intended, as when you latch yourself to a monster, in Sunbreak you won't get thrown off, and end up taking more damage than you mean to. This health regeneration build allows you to counter that aspect, so long as the monster body part is broken in the first place, keeping you in the fight whilst allowing you to deal that damage. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you another endgame build, this time for the switch axe in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.